Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Vadim Perlovsky, and this is the Virtual Tasting Society. We're excited to welcome Jason Parker from Copperworks Distilling. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jason. Jason is someone that I've been following through some of my podcasts and someone who's making waves in the industry. We're excited to learn your background and a lot about your brand. But joining us today is the Los Angeles Whiskey and Spirits Guild. As always, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. The president of the guild is David Donahue. David, you want to say a couple of words?
Thank you very much, Vadim. We really do appreciate it. And like he said, Jason, we have been looking forward to this for a great while and with a lot of anticipation. This is going to be a wonderful evening. And also, I want to say thank you to Vadim for all the work and effort that you put into coordinating, scheduling these virtual tastings for all of us. We really have gotten to enjoy them through COVID and over 100 plus of these virtual tastings, and it's such a fantastic thing to see so many regular faces that do participate. And if there's anybody new, welcome. Vadim will be going through some best practices for the virtual tasting experience, and also, like what Jason said, he's going to be encouraging, you might have your mic muted, but then, do definitely engage. So welcome everybody again, and thank you for your time, Jason.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David. Yeah, welcome. I see a lot of familiar faces. Welcome back to all the regulars. Happy to see you. Thank you for coming back. Anybody who's here for the first time, as David mentioned, this is a participatory class. So we're here to get nerdy, ask questions, share tasting notes, what have you. This is not a one-way YouTube live or whatever. You're here, you're part of the class, so participate. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have. All we ask is that if you're not talking, keep yourself on mute so we don't have background noise and we're not talking over each other. And, a lot of times you may forget, and kids in the background, dogs, husbands, wives, whatever have you. So stay on mute unless you are asking a question, but then you are always welcome to unmute and participate. Chat is your friend, so use that. We'll make sure. We did toss the PowerPoint into the chat as well. So if you want to download that, thank you, Jordan, for doing that. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jason Parker to introduce the class.
Well, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much. You guys, this is a real treat to be able to kind of travel virtually down and see you guys. I'm going to tell you, this is the second time that I have presented this. So the first time I got some of the bugs out, and I think by the end of tonight, I'll get most of the bugs out. This is a sort of a deep dive. I'm going to think of it as more like a 200 level version. What we're really trying to unpack here is not just what do you taste, but actually what are the mechanics of tasting? How do they work? It's not something that you normally get an introduction into unless you're taking a sommelier class. And even then, a lot of that is going to be more about the regions of wine producers and stuff. So this is really just the mechanics of tasting. I'm working on closing a bunch of things on my desktop now so that when I do go to open this up and start, you don't have to look through everything. So let me start sharing this screen. If you happen to have the screen already open, you'll know what's coming up. We're going to start immediately with drinking. We have 5 or 6 whiskeys to drink. Not only do you not know what they are, I also do not know what they are. So this is not for us to get the right answer when we're tasting. This is actually for us to exercise some of the knowledge that we'll have just covered in a few slides before. But we're going to start with just tasting right off the bat our first whiskey. So let me get that screen up just to make sure that I'm able to share this, and then Adam and I may pull down the screen ever so often and go back to faces. So
if I may interrupt, I just want to kind of set the scene for anyone playing along at home. We're going to record this and put this on YouTube later for people to watch. And so just if you're joining us now, if you have the samples or you don't, today's experience is not just a regular taste 6 expressions from a brand and talk about them and get tasting notes. As you mentioned today, is to learn how to taste whiskey and what you understand the flavor notes that you're getting and why you're getting them. But as part of this experience, we organized 6 different expressions that everyone in the group that will be tasting blind. So nobody, including Jason, knows what any of these samples are. And we're not here to pick out our favorite. We're not here to say, oh, this one's better than that one. It's just different expressions of different things for us to taste and find different notes and have some fun with it.
Yep.
So that's gonna be part of the fun tonight.
But real quick, to be clear, even though it's blind, do we at least have a baseline of they're all, you know, a certain spirit, or are they?
They're all gonna be whiskey.
Okay,
So
cool.
they're all whiskey, and we will reveal each expression at the end.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I'm making, it looks to me like we're able to see the slide deck. So what we're going to do is be going through, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the topics. And this is just sort of the agenda for what we're going to cover, esters and why evaluation, where that comes from. Then we'll drink another whiskey and talk about the physiology. I think that's going to be a fun part. I'm going to give you guys some of my philosophy on how to taste, but I expect to hear some more things coming in from you too about what works and what doesn't. We will be doing some aroma evaluations, but all of these are going to be blind, and we'll talk about detection limits, and I'll give you sort of our philosophy on proofing for evaluation. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and pour whiskey 1 into a glass. Madam, do you want to tell us how you lead whiskey tastings? And you can lead all the whiskey tastings, and then I'm going to jump into the lecture part.
What do you mean by, I just want people to enjoy this. I don't want to give anything away until we get to the end.
So I am going to give a quick philosophy of something that I always do. I usually taste in 3 things. I taste the nose, or I nose first, then I taste the entry, write down their flavor. I then talk about the finish, and then I give it an overall sort of not score as much as evaluation. And thinking about those 3, it's sort of the Jim Murray method, and I've been using it for a long time. Looks like most of you guys are using whiskey nosing glasses. They're great. So you know, my brain wants to go immediately to answering, what is this in my glass? What category of whiskey is it? Where in the world does it come from? I don't know if you guys are following the same thing. Why don't you enjoy that for a minute while I get into the first slide to do a refresher for some of you, and some of you may not have this at all in your background. So what you smell in this glass, does anybody want to come off mic or put into the chat a couple of words that you might have for an aroma?
Malted barley and wine.
Malted barley and wine, okay?
I get like a Chardonnay, like a white wine. No, at first at bat, like a fruity.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So we're getting alcohol, and because I've heard both wine, and then within the wine, the first descriptor was wine, but not a type of wine, not red wine, white wine, not sherry or anything. And then later we had white wine.
Red wine, if we want to be specific.
Okay. Yep. Good. What I find on all of these is the way I come up with words is I first put the big category like you just did, and then I ask myself what type of that category. So if I say it's fruity, what type of fruit? It's citrus, what type of citrus? It's orange, what part of the orange? It's the peel. Is it the inside or the outside? It's the pith. Okay, so now I can get down to, this has an aroma of orange pith. And that's a kind of an example of the way you may ask yourself questions. Well, where are flavors coming from? They're coming really in, we're going to get into the mechanics of this in a second, but they're coming from the production of esters. And esters are a really simple combination of an alcohol and an acid. So let's go at the top of this screen. If we look over to the left, we see that we have alcohol in a barrel. We have a lot of alcohol in the barrel. The fortunate thing for whiskey, unfortunate for beer and wine in the cask, is that air gets into the barrel. You know, as the angel share comes out, air goes in. Air has oxygen. Oxygen oxidizes compounds. Primarily aldehydes are created which then form even more oxidation components turning into acids. And when an acid and an alcohol bump into each other, that's what forms an ester. So what this slide here is showing is just a whole bunch of named combinations of aldehydes, of acids and alcohols, and then what the name of that ester is. And then a little diagram that shows maybe what it smells like. You'll notice that a lot of them have similar diagrams, meaning that a whole bunch of different acids can join with a whole bunch of different alcohols and still form a similar smelling compound. Well, again, we're going to get into more about why they might smell similar in a minute, but you'll see a lot of fruit designs in there. You'll see a lot of food elements. And that is sort of how our senses are designed to work, is like food. Yes.
Not to get too meta here, but who decided what each of these compounds actually smells like? Because isn't that in a way ultimately subjective to a certain extent?
Well, yes. And so great question. Thank you for the segue. Here is the question. How did sensory evaluation come to be? Who decided that sensory evaluation is a thing, and who came up with the scores and the ratings and the methods and those graphs? So wonderful question. So obviously there was a time way before, perhaps even before humanity, before Homo sapiens, that our primates have used smell and taste to make selections, primarily on food, but even other things like fear of another animal. In food selection and water quality and things like that, the original decision was preference. And if you decided you liked the smell or taste of something over something else, that was all you needed. It of course led to grading things. You know, how did the Romans grade their olive oil? By color, smell, and flavor. And it led to a scoring. The tasting programs, believe it or not, didn't really start until the 1930s and 1940s. And actually in World War II, when ready-to-eat meals were being prepared and given to soldiers in the field, and the soldiers were, even though they were healthy for them, they were rejecting them because they didn't look good and they didn't taste good. They formed a panel of organoleptic evaluators, and that's the word they use. Organoleptic basically means that you're smelling the organic and tasting the organic byproducts. That led to a formal science of tasting and smell. And then of course with gas chromatograph and mass spec and things like that, we're able to determine what is the individual compound. So I don't know how many of you have had the experience of being in a chemistry lab where you have a gas chromatograph hooked up to a nosing tube, but you literally smell the compound coming off that column. And when you can see a peak, oh, this is methanol coming off, you can smell methanol. And it's a great way to begin to standardize the vocabulary. So I hope that answered your question, but the bottom line is these words have been given their pictures by a trained group of panelists who know that they are actually smelling that particular compound. And that group of panelists comes up with what's called a controlled vocabulary. They use the same words to describe them to other people. That's an important part of becoming a better taster. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight, if you take nothing else home from this, is that you can always become a better taster. You're never going to start out good, and you can always get better. And all it takes is a concentrated practice. You have to decide that you want to write the words down, and you want to seek out those aromas again in another product and begin to train your mind to put the difficult skill of putting a word to an aroma. So with that in mind, do you guys get any other words? One of the things that's nice about this whiskey is that it's now been sitting in the glass for all of 7 minutes while I ramble on about the history of tasting. So it's opened up a little more. So you should actually be able to get maybe some other compounds out of there that weren't available when the first compounds were hitting your nose.
I get a buttery taste, a buttery aroma and a buttery taste.
I want to say this is like a space side, like a scotch.
Yeah, so you do what I do. You want to go straight to what is it?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that sometimes is a good way to begin to predict, okay, if it's the space side, then it's probably going to have very little, if any, peated quality to it. But in fact, it may have 3 or 4% peat, and that usually expresses itself as honey. So am I picking up any dark honey in here? Yeah, maybe. I agree with you. I get that mustiness that I get out of space side. I get some of the things. I have no idea if we're right. It could be a Japanese whiskey for that matter, but
For sure. Yeah.
I'm getting a couple that made me think Irish pot still, but it's along the same lines of the space side. It's those gorgeous floral honey light notes.
yeah.
Oily.
So what you guys have already described is that you know that there are words that you equate to flavors and even categories of whiskey. And so the skill, of course, is to get better at that. And the easiest way to do that is practice, practice, practice with an intent to get better, not just drinking whiskey. There's nothing wrong with that either, but actually working at it to learn the vocabularies. I don't really want to drain this slide because it's really not relevant to what we're doing tonight. I do want to just let you know that just because we're doing whiskey tasting, there are a lot of taste panels, and most taste panels are to detect faults. They're literally looking to find a known thing, like somebody mentioned butter. Butter is usually diacetyl. Diacetyl in beer, for instance, is always a bad thing, except for very few styles of beer. So you want to think about butter or butterscotch in taste panels of beer, and you're going to look for them in these difference tests or these ranked and stacked tests. So the first 2 boxes you see there. There's a way to train yourself to taste or detect, usually smell those compounds. That's called sensitivity test. We're not doing any of that today. We're doing the last thing, which is just simply descriptive test. And it's usually, it smells like this and I like it or I don't like it. And that's about as far as it needs to go, unless you're actually working in a company that's trying to find the faults before the customer does. Good news, bad news. Panelists are the measuring instruments on all this. So again, back to your question about who came up with these words. We're highly variable. That means that what you smell is not what I smell. And that's physiological. It's easy to get us influenced. You just say the word and we start thinking it's there. In order to have statistical validity, we have to have large numbers. And by large numbers, I mean 30 or 40 people who are trained panelists to be able to even make good statistical results. We always have our own blind spots. Some people are super tasters of one compound, like I am really a good taster of diacetyl, and I'm really weak on other compounds. And then the best part about people doing the tasting is that we can measure the thing that needs to be measured. Is it good to people? Do people like this? And an instrument can't do that. Okay, as you can tell, we're not really spending a lot of time on these whiskeys because I want to spend some time actually talking about how this works. But are there any last thoughts on whiskey 1 that some of you want to share with us before we pour and taste about whiskey 2?
Jason, you said you have an acute sensitivity to diacetyl, or you said
Yep.
that's your. How did you figure that out? Like, what is it about it that jumps out to you? Or because I know like there's a few people that have sensitivities to different. Like I have somewhat of a sensitivity to peat. If it's in there, I'll notice it. Benno's known for his sensitivity to sulfur, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's got a sensitivity to something. How does that one? Because that's not a flavor note, right? You're talking about compounds. What does that show itself as?
And actually, so are you. When you mentioned those 2 concepts, those are, of course, known compounds, especially sulfurous, DMS, DMSO, et cetera. We know what we're smelling. The way I did that was accidental. I stood up a panel at Pyramid when I was brewmaster at Pyramid Breweries. I stood up a panel of I actually had 30 tasters on panel, and I was going through, we would meet 3 days a week, and we would do that training. So when I went back up over to here, we were doing sensitivity testing. I would give them something that had a little dose of a, like a plain beer, like an Anheuser-Busch beer. It would have a few drops of diacetyl compound, synthesized in one of the 3 glasses. And I'd say, pick the odd one out. Which one do you detect? And then we would get lower and lower. Each week we would lower the amount of drops that we put in to the point where most people couldn't find the difference. They were like random guesses. I think it's number 1, but it's actually number 3. Sometimes they'd get it right, but they weren't sure why. They couldn't reproduce it in the second test. But certain people always smelled it. And they were like, oh God, this is really strong. It's obviously this one. I was one of those people for diacetyl. I have blind spots for terpenes, things that give people kind of that pot marijuana sort of flavor out of hops. To me, it just smells piney, and I can't even really tell if it's that. So, yeah, we all do.
So you're saying then that for some of those things, Jason, like the diacetyl, that butter flavor, because I remember picking it up on some stuff in some tastings, and when people are like, I don't really taste it. So it's just that, each person's individual sensitivity may differ, and some people, are higher and more sensitive to it, and others just don't get it, right?
That's right. And so here's what's interesting about that. Not only are neither of you wrong, you're actually both right, but it can be what you may detect as, oh, wow, this is a really off flavor. This flavor, this butterscotch is like, something, in a movie theater popcorn. I can't believe how strong this is. And another person will describe the same whiskey as being warm, soft, full. They're going to use all these positive adjectives because they can't actually taste the butter. They taste sort of the effect of the butter. That is why a taste panel needs to be big enough, is also why you may be right and they may be right. And when you're building a whiskey for a release, you can't just have one person, unless your only goal is to make it consistent. If you're making it different each time, you're going to need a group of people who have diverse flavors.
And real quick, one thing I was around that first, is there a tasting kit somewhere that has the canonical examples or like chemical compounds of each of these flavors if someone was interested in like getting better at tasting? Because for example, when I looked at the list, I saw one thing in there I've never heard of or seen before called Lang Lang, I guess, or Yang Yang, or however you say it, and I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what it is. So I looked it up and I'm like, all right, it's this thing, but I've never heard anyone mention it, never tasted it, but it's on the sheet. So it's like, how would you ever know it something smells or tastes like that if you've never experienced it?
That's right. The bad news is there's a lot of tasting kits out there, all willing to take your money. None of them are really going to be very helpful. The best way to do this is to go to the farmer's market, spend time not buying fruit and vegetables in order to bring them home and cook them, but in order to learn about their smells, let them get overripe, let them go to the point to where they are really producing isoamyl acetate for a banana, or whatever.
Outgassing basically on their chemical compounds.
Right. Get to the point to where you're like, oh, I know when somebody says lychee, I know what they mean because I've smelled a dozen lychees in my time. Play around with a lot of different teas and learn about the different tannins and how they smell. Use a lot of different sugar syrups and learn what those smell and taste like. That's going to get you to the point where you're creating a memory for those flavors. And that's way more important than kind of doing a detection limit test on a chemical. The chemical will get you there, but it won't really smell real. It'll smell fake, because you have to put it all by itself. So let's just, we're going to get to that in just a second. Let's talk about this whiskey, and then we'll go and talk about how sensory works.
Jason, I just had one other thing. Like, how do you cleanse your palate? Like, like sushi, where you get ginger, and they give water, and you don't want that whiskey 1 to influence whiskey 2 because you're going through a tasting through a different bunch. Would you just use water or distilled water, or what you recommend? I have Kentucky bourbon water, whatever they have here that I had a bottle from the,
Cool.
there,
Yeah.
but what
Well,
recommend?
So the thing that's going to get overtaxed way before your palate is your nose. So we're actually about to talk about that. You guys are great at leading me into my next slide. Here's the trick. When you actually can't smell anything anymore, we're going to learn about this in just a second. It takes a couple of minutes for you to recalibrate, for the molecules that are stuck to your olfactory bulb to actually blow away, and you have fresh air in there. A trick that tasters use, I use a lot, is to actually smell yourself. Smell your arm. Don't smell your armpit. Don't smell your neighbor's arm. Certainly don't smell your boot. But smelling your arm, to you smell generally neutral. Now, this is also coming with a caveat, which is when you're doing tasting, serious tasting, don't lather up in really smelly soap, really smelly shampoo, God forbid, lotions or things that have fragrance in them. I've actually had to ask some of my taste panel folks to go home and clean and come back and taste, because none of us can taste through the cologne they're wearing. So just you have to think about what you're trying to do there. So that was a segue into this concept of the kind of the chain of perception. So first thing, of course, the stimulus, that is the compound, hits the nerve organ. We're going to look at that one in just a minute. The brain interprets that based on what you have smelled before. You've probably had this problem of smelling something and not being able to put a word to it, because you've never successfully put that word to it before, but you still recognize the smell. It's not something easy like bananas or strawberries or peaches. It's something that's kind of funky, and you're like, God, what is that? Is it a garage? Is it motor oil? Is it, what is it? It's spicy. And you just need to wait until you get that. So the brain interprets that, and then you eventually form a perception. Okay, let's do a little bit of smelling on whiskey number 2.
Yeah, I'm getting tropical fruit on this one.
Any particular tropical fruit?
That's the problem.
I'm going to say roasted coconut.
Yeah, I get coconut for sure. Yeah.
Shoe polish.
Ooh, interesting. So shoe polish is usually acetone, and acetone is usually a bad thing in a young whiskey, but a common thing in an older whiskey. So you can be almost guessing the age by how much acetone you smell. By the way, acetone is not something that everybody smells equally.
I want to say this was barreled in rum, too. Like aged in rum barrels.
There's chocolate in there.
I get kind of like a wooden, like a wickery note.
Oh, yeah, interesting. So
Yeah, I
not
get
just
like
any
an
type of wood,
old
wicker.
oak.
That's cool.
Old oak note for sure.
Yeah, definitely oak with the sweet. I get a sweetness that gets me like a rum barrel, but I could be absolutely wrong.
Remember, we're going to get a chance to learn what these are. So if you keep a little bit in your glass or your bottle and you want to go back and taste once you know that.
Besides smelling yourself, does smelling coffee help reset your sort of nose, Jason? I've seen people talk about that during tastings.
Absolutely. All sorts. So a more generic question is there anything you can smell that will definitively reset your nose? The answer is no. But if you have a ritual and you're used to smelling something and calling that baseline, calling that 0, whether that's your arm, whether that's a type of coffee that you always make, that works. It wouldn't make sense to smell another strongly flavored thing, which is why I would say coffee wouldn't normally be my choice. I'm going to look for air. Briefly wanted to mention that when you're in a room with too much air moving, so let's say you're sitting underneath an HVAC and there's a fan blowing, or there's a fan blowing near you, you actually are going to have a hard time smelling because the concentration of aromas is being moved away from your nose too fast. So even though you do want some circulation, you don't want to be in a room that has a bunch of stale aromas. You do need things to move. So let's look, I'm gonna shrink my, oops, I need to come back to this. I'm gonna shrink this thing down a little bit so I can see everything. This,
Jason.
yes, go ahead.
One quick thing, I don't want to interrupt, but as people are guessing and having fun picking out tasting notes, I hadn't planned this, but I threw these together real quick. Just have some fun to see how many people get these for when I do the reveal. So if you don't mind, I'm going to throw out a couple of polls as we go. Hopefully they don't get too much in the way of the experience and they don't give too much away. So I hope everybody's still paying attention. On sample number 1, I'm curious what people thought, where's it from? So I'm going to launch that, and you can vote as well since you're tasting blind. As well.
Yeah, I'm
And
tasting
I won't,
blind.
I won't reveal what people guess, so it doesn't influence anyone. We'll talk about it at the end. I'm just curious.
That's a really great idea. That's gonna be fun. So I love this, Jason, you just wrote, smells like opening a bag of Chips Ahoy cookies. That's actually the type of description that you almost always need to start with. And then as you smell other things, including Chips Ahoy cookies, you're going to ask yourself, what is the thing about Chips Ahoy? Is it the dough? Is it the plastic the bag is in? Is it the, you know, some compound they use to make things look and smell like chocolate?
Yeah, it's 14 different things all at the same time that make one cohesive smell.
Right. And so that's what makes it difficult, is when it's so specific to you and you alone. If you say, well, it smells like grandma's attic in the springtime, but not the summer, people are going to be like, I don't quite understand what you mean by that. But yeah, but coconut cookies, right? So now we're getting into some interesting topics about how things work in synergy. So I want to show you this next slide, because this is going to show you how volatiles actually work. There's two concepts. There's the one that we think of as smelling is called orthonasal olfaction. That means sniffing in. And we all think that that's what the nose does, that the nose sniffs in and smells things from outside. But the primary way that we develop flavor is actually retronasal olfaction. So that's the opposite. It's the same olfactory bulb, but it's after we have swallowed and digested this this meat, this cheese, this wine or whiskey, that we get back these aromas, and they're more concentrated because there's not all this air moving around them, and they've been kind of burst open, you know, through the movement through our body. And that's what we refer to as flavor. Of course, we have the primary taste. There used to be 4, then there were 5, now there's 7 primary tastes. But primary tastes are not really what we're talking about. Flavor, that's just taste. So what are tastes? That's salt, astringent, bitter, sour, sweet, calcium, fat, and umami. And so, you know, those are the things that we think of as just pure taste. So here's the device let's see if I can make this go forward. Here's the device that's actually doing the detection of aromas. And I feel like I have a better picture of this. No, I don't. So sorry. What's on the left is a little drawing of a cutaway. I hope nobody ever has to see this in real life. This is a drawing of the cutaway of a nasal cavity showing a rose with some molecules going up. And you'll see that at the base of the brain, there's a little box there, and it's called the olfactory bulb. And you can see that at the base of the brain is sort of a bulb shape that's running horizontally along the whole bottom of the brain. And then to the right is a drawing that gives much more detail to that. And if you look at the very bottom of the right-hand bottom slide, you'll see these little odor molecules, the ones that were coming off of the rose, have to find their way to these silica, these tiny little, almost like roots. That is what is creating the chemical stimulus, which becomes an electrical stimulus that goes up into the brain. It's magic as far as we know about how the brain actually interprets it. But those silica get crowded, they get covered. And when we lose the ability to smell something, it's because we've overwhelmed them. And the bad news is that can be almost 3 minutes for certain aromas. If you've ever smelled something really sulfury, like a stink bomb or something, you'll realize it can take you a long time to get that smell out of your nose. You know, you can be in a different part of the house or even outside and you still think you smell it. Smoke is another good example of that. It takes a long time to get rid of. Okay, I'm just making sure we're looking.
Is that because the odor molecules are actually still bonded with the different, you know, cilia there, or is it just because the brain is still sensing it? You know what I mean?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm under the impression that it's primarily that it is physically still with you. But I also, you remember the slide a few slides ago, we talked about the 3 processes that happen, the chain,
Yep.
and that interpreting the perception and then coming up with a response to that, like I like it, I don't like it, it smells like that, could actually still be lingering. It may be that the sensory has left, but you're still interpreting it. I don't know.
Are those netter diagrams?
I don't know. These,
Yeah.
I don't know where I got these
Huh.
anymore. Yeah, I've had these. Like I said, I put this together for a while. Okay, have we gotten our? Let me stop sharing for a second. Let's look at each other and talk about our next whiskey, which is whiskey number 3. And is this number 2 or number 3 that we're at? Okay, good. Thank you, Adam. Number 2. What are the main grains in number 2? Ooh, this one's gonna be fun.
What? This is like leading the witness.
What do you mean?
Nothing. Oh, someone did ask Jason about, and I was wondering too, the 80 to 90% of flavor coming from smell thing. Would you say that's
Yeah,
accurate?
yeah, I would say that's probably the I'd say that's probably true. I have to say I always get aggravated when people say that 80% of whiskey flavor comes from a barrel, because it comes from oxidation, esterification, and it's not the barrel, but
The yeast.
yeah, I mean, that's where the compounds are developed, and then the transformation of them in the cask are what lead to the things that we smell. It's really oxygen that's doing the job, not the wood. But but anyway, that's not what you asked. I'm not really sure if it's 90%, but it's way up there, isn't it? It has to be, because it's so distinctive. I'm going to go back to sharing screen here for a minute.
So we're on sample 3 now, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, these are good.
Jason, I like what you said about your brain and your memory connecting what you're smelling to your past memories. And I tell people that all the time when doing a tastings. Just go to your memory. Let your memory tell you what's in there.
You know, what's interesting about this, if you imagine where the actual olfactory bulb, as we're looking at, is in the front, kind of in the sinuses underneath the nose, behind the eyes, but where that channels to is in the back of the brain, really the primal brain, and all of those frontal lobes that are above there are where vocabulary is formed. And the sensory perception of aromas basically happens in the reptilian brain, and the modern brain is what comes up with the vocabulary. So they're not only physically about as far apart as they can be, they're also eons apart in how long we've been connecting the two. And so I just think it's remarkable that we can even put a word, which is a modern thing for us, to an aroma. Yet we can, but only through practice. It just doesn't come off natural yet. Those are things that you can learn.
Well, while we're talking about this, have you heard about the recent issues with people developing parosmia, Jason, as a result of COVID, and that totally messing up their ability to taste, including some people who taste like whiskey and wine and stuff?
Yeah, isn't that horrible? I mean, there's a lot of things that would take some of the fun out of life. I'd hate to be blind, I hate to be deaf, but I'd really hate to not be able to taste or smell, especially in my job.
Well, so in this case, right, it's not the anosmia where they lose the sense of taste or smell. It's actually, it gets scrambled, which is what I find super interesting.
Oh, no.
So certain things that normally taste good actually taste, and for whatever reason, I haven't figured this out. Stuff that food tastes bad, like to the point where it makes people throw up and get sick.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but what's interesting is to this whole thing, and this is why it's like kind of fascinating, is like it's actually scrambles somehow, and stuff that you eat or things that you like or things that smell good smell and taste awful. So
Wow.
it's affected a significant number of people. I was streaming about the other day. It's crazy.
It sounds like pregnancy. Ladies.
What's the word?
Parosmia, 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 as opposed to anosmia, right? Where anosmia is the lack of ability to sense taste or smell, and parosmia is basically having it mixed up.
Wow.
It often happens with people that develop dementia too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Boy.
It's apparently very debilitating.
Well, we really have something to look forward to, don't we? better living through whiskey. So whiskey number 3, thoughts, words, vocabularies. I'll get back to that. I'm
I think
gonna
it's
turn
an
off.
Isla peat, peated Scotch.
Like a peated, fruity, Japanese, Irish blend. I've got my head just confused right now.
So that means I'm doing a good job.
So we get peat out of it, right? There's a type of peat. If you've been drinking enough scotches, you may be able to determine where that peat comes from. You know, you may think that this is, Talisker type of peat, or is this more like, what am I trying to say?
Island peat versus say Isla peat or island peat. I posted the link, by the way, in the chat if you're curious on the parosmia thing.
Oh, good, thank you. Okay, I'll save that chat.
Irish. I think this is like a Lefroy.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is Highland peat to me, definitely not an Isla peat. More sulfury, not as salty.
Oh yeah. It's absolutely not. Yep, this is 100% Highland peat because I don't like it as much.
Well, and it's missing any of that menthol eucalyptus type of finish in it too. I don't know if you guys get that, but that's the thing I always get from Isla peat.
Vadim, who put these sample bottles together? So you sourced the bottles and put them together. Okay.
So he knows what they are. You just don't know which one is which.
Okay.
And I'm going to throw it out there, 90 to 95 proof on that. That didn't seem like a heavy hitter to me.
I'm gonna agree with Sean, but I think it's like that Lefroy quarter cask with the bourbon.
Vadim put up another poll for this one, which is a fun one. I'm assuming, yep, there it is, number 3. One of the things that you can learn, when you probably already know this from wine, American oak frequently has dill. So if you're picking up a little bit of dill notes and you're trying to figure out what type of cask was it in, pretty good guess that it was an American oak. So an ex-bourbon cask, or of course a new oak cask if you're using certain whiskeys. All righty.
This is one of my favorites. I just have to say though, I like this one.
I'm going to go back to the share here. Let's see, share screen. Okay, so that was whiskey 3. Let's go back into some slides here. So this is a little bit of preaching to the choir here. You know that there's a lot of things that you use to evaluate whiskey. Why would I put look? Because obviously you will determine certain things. Is it cloudy? Is it light in color or dark in color? And so, that'll help you. And then of course you smell, do a little taste, do more smells, do a little taste. In your taste panels, do you guys add water? Do you tend to add water to taste?
We do it based on the person, so it's open forum. We don't.
What is this water thing you talk of?
Well, so you may be aware of this already, that when the big distillers, you know, they hire a noser, Brian Kinsman, you know, for Balvenie, they don't taste. They only nose. Their nose is insured for millions of dollars, and their job is to evaluate maybe 300 whiskeys some days. And you're not going to taste, you're not even going to want to smell 300 whiskeys at anywhere near enjoyable proof. So they generally have the lab proof all of those samples for them to 40 proof, 20% alcohol. And that's what they smell in order to make decisions. Now, if you've never purposefully ruined a dram of whiskey, I really encourage you to do this. Sit down with a glass of water and a dropper and put in, you know, put a half an ounce of whiskey in, nose it, smell it, write down some thoughts, and put whole squirts of water into it and go through that process again until the point where it mostly tastes like woody water. And what you're going to be able to determine are things that you never smelled before. You're going to smell raw grain. You're going to smell the sides of the barrel. You'll smell yeast components, like kind of vegetative things that were just totally masked by the alcohol. And ruining a little bit of whiskey is worth getting that experience from. You don't need to do this every time, but I actually do it when I really have purchased a bottle that I'm fascinated by and very interested in. Even if it was several $100s, I'm going to do that with one, you know, between a half an ounce and an ounce of that whiskey, because I get so much from it and I learn so much more when that proof is way, way down. I'm not really tasting anything at that time. I'm only smelling. But I'll have to say, water it removes so much out of the way. It's worth experimenting with.
One other thing someone had told me once, Jason, I was curious if you've ever done this, is you can actually take a little bit of whiskey, put it in your hands, rub your hands together until they're sticky, which basically means you've evaporated all the alcohol off, cup your hands together and then smell. Yeah. And then you're left with sort of the essential flavors of the whiskey without, I don't know, diluting it in a way.
That's true. I'm almost certain all of you have experienced this, where you've enjoyed a whiskey at night, and for whatever reason, you did not wash out your whiskey nosing glass, and you come back in the morning and you smell it and you're like, ooh, that is delicious. Wow, all that oak and all that, you know, caramel, and of course there's absolutely nothing in there. It's just dried, crusty stuff on the bottom, but it smells great. And that's probably the same thing as rubbing your hands together. You're accomplishing the removal of the alcohol so that you can smell the base. But that's not quite the same as diluting all of those compounds with water to where they're still present. They're just so small. This takes us all the way back up to this problem of oversaturating your olfactory cells. You just don't have that risk. But you have to learn how to translate from a 20 proof or a 40 proof, a 20% alcohol, to what it would be bottled at. And again, how do you do that? You do that through experience. You're not born knowing that. I just put this is the Whiskey Magazine's color chart. Color is, this is useless. I mean, it's fun, but you're seldom going to get much information about what something tastes like if it's a 0.7 or a 0.8. Forgetting the whole artificial color thing, each individual cask is going to add more or less color, and it's just easier just to look at it against your notebook. So, you know, we do look at, so I'm going to go into some of these things real quickly. Of course, we look for clarity or not. It's an indicator of something else if it's not clear, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It may be like we have released a whiskey that was finished in a beer cask, and the beer clouded the whiskey a little. And of course, we did not filter that. We wanted that that stout aroma and flavor in there. But appearance is useful. nosing, it's always great to write your first impressions down because you may never get them again. It's the volatiles that come out first. It's the things that it just blows you away. I don't actually like whiskeys as much when I first pour them in the glass as I do 15 or 30 minutes later. So I generally pour 2 glasses of whiskey, work through the first one for the half an hour, and then start on the one that I'm really interested in, which is the one that's been sitting open for about 30 minutes. I find that much more rewarding than adding water to it. Time between sniffs. Yeah, if you've ever done that thing where you just keep trying to smell and learn more about it, and then eventually you just can't smell a thing. The science says that it takes between 5 and 20 seconds to get the majority of your smell capacity back. I think that's exaggerated. I think that you can get your capacity back within a couple of seconds, but probably not acute, not to the degree that you had it when you first started smelling. So it's also why when you are sitting down with 5 whiskeys, it's a good idea to actually taste them in different orders than other people are tasting them if you're going to be ranking them or judging them. Because if you all smell them at the same time, you're all going to have that first hit that is going to be different than if you've already smelled 3 whiskeys by the time you get to the 4th one. I've mentioned the setting, no off smells, gentle air exchange. I think you guys probably know the importance of using a nosing glass. I like the Glencairns, but there's a lot of tulip shaped glasses, including sherry tulips. Of course, when you're nosing, you're always nosing at room temperature. Warmer is better. Body temperature is ideal, but that's generally too warm for most of us to enjoy the flavors. So 70 degrees is a good temperature to, Fahrenheit is a good temperature to taste and smell whiskey at, not, with an ice cube in it. In wine, this is something I always try to share with people. I'm going to come off screen or come off share for a minute. You know how in wine, you see people do this? I always recommend don't do this. Don't shake your glass, roll it, just get it wet on the sides. That's all it takes. And the reason is because we're drinking stuff that's 40, maybe even above 50% alcohol in a little tiny chimney designed to raise flavors up. So you're going to anesthetize your nose. But if you give it a roll, you have enough on the side to form legs. You can look at the viscosity of it, what type of oils, what type of residual sugars are in there, and then use that aroma to smell. And it should be a little bit easier on your nose, a little more fruity, a little bit less alcoholic. Any questions on that? Let me check the chat here and see. Okay, talking about whiskeys, that's cool. Let's go back to share. Any comments so far? Anything you guys want to stop on?
So we're tasting and smelling number 4 right now. Have we already discussed it?
Let's see here.
Yeah.
No, shall we?
Ooh, stronger.
Yeah, I was ahead of the game right there.
Yeah.
Definitely a strong one.
So Jason, are you gonna discuss about another thing I've heard people talk about is, especially when you're doing a tasting, there's a whole thing about doing, how do I put this? If you're tasting 6 whiskeys, by the time you get to the 6th whiskey, your palate has changed and, been deadened to maybe the alcohol. And so maybe you want to save some of the first to revisit it. And or plus each time you taste something new, the first sip doesn't really get you the full flavor. You need at least by the 3rd sip or something to really get the flavors, et cetera, sort of some of that.
That's right. Yeah. So those are really good points. First of all, let's talk about that first one. You remember me saying, if you're trying to do something to judge it and you have a panel, that you should not all taste the same whiskey first and then the second whiskey second. You should all mix them up. That helps accomplish some parity with those problems you talked about. We all know that taste fatigue comes in, or aroma fatigue. We talked about how many minutes it takes. I think that even the professional tasters would tell you that 2 hours is absolute maximum. These are people who do this every day, all day for a living, and they can't do more than 2 hours a day out of a 24-hour day. So if you're not a professional and you're making some mistakes by burying your nose in and smelling too much and not giving yourself a chance, you're probably really only going to be good for, an hour. And if you're really going to treat a whiskey well and learn all about it, you want to give it time to open. And so it would not be, and you probably all do this, it would be a fun and I think respectful thing to the whiskey to give it an hour. Taste it, smell it, pour a couple of glasses of it at the same time so that one of them has been oxidizing and off-gassing its early volatiles longer instead of it still being in the bottle. There's this concept about neck pours that I have to tell you I don't believe in. I know enough about whiskey to know that it doesn't stratify to the point where you're getting a different set of compounds from the top. But if you're worried about that, you flip the bottle over and then you pour it. What's I think a little bit of it is a superstition, and I think it's based on that real experience you described of the first time you taste whiskey, it tastes different. And that's because none of your senses have been bombarded and somewhat desensitized. And from then on out, they're only going to get less sensitive. If you even remember the days in your life when you did not like whiskey, I know some of you that may have never, you can't even think back that far, but there might have been a time when alcohol was a little bit tough for anybody. And it was a learning curve that we got through. One day we got to the point where not only did it not hurt, but we actually welcomed it. We wanted to try a little more. We went through the wall. We're now fans, and then we can even become more aficionados. Yeah, wow, this is tasty, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I don't want to influence anyone, but they've all been good, but this one is like candy. It's just got this sweetness to it. It's interesting.
It's got the most going on of the four, I would say, that we've tasted, for what that's worth.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what the reveal is.
Jason, I had a question on the nose. Like, I had my wife and had done a tasting actually without me out in Virginia, and one of the tastings, the whiskey, was they put it on the top of the rim, nose, or inside. I've been doing inside. Is there a preference, or does it matter? Like, nosing it, do you want to do the rim on top like this?
Well, so
side?
My advice is always be outside of the glass. Here's the reason. It's exactly that over stimulation that you're going to get when you bury your nose in the glass. Now, if you're drinking wine and you've got a very large wine glass, the big bowls that a red wine glass has, and it's open to the top, it's not a chimney shaped, I think you would be able to get away with putting your nose deep into there and really smelling from each side and getting those compounds in. I don't think you want to do that for alcohol of this proof, especially proof that's over 50% alcohol.
Well, the trick I've heard too was that actually you hold your nose above the glass and you actually breathe in through your mouth, and you still get the olfactory sensation without getting all of the alcohol burn, which seems to work whenever I've done it.
That is so true for some people. I have to admit, I absolutely have never been able to make that work. It is a thing that about 70% of the people that I've talked to in the wine wine study groups, they're not able to accomplish that. And the other 70% find it helpful. So definitely try that. So basically what you're saying is you're still breathing air in, and it's still going over the olfactory bulbs, but it's not going just through your nose. It's actually bringing in more fresh air because your mouth is a bigger funnel for air. So you're diluting it more. Makes a lot of sense. Doesn't work for me. Oh, why? Yeah.
I wonder if it has to do with how the back of the mouth is connected to up there and stuff like that. But
Yes,
yeah.
I think it does. And the shape of your sinuses. I mean,
Mhm.
that's huge, right? And you know, people who are scuba divers know how different sinuses can be.
Actually, I think maybe it's tied to the turbinods, because I remember this with cigars, because there's people who can smoke. When we smoke cigars, there are people who can breathe out through their nose easily after taking the smoke in their mouth. And I remember a friend of mine said he couldn't do this till he had turbinod surgery. And then all of a sudden he was just breathing out through his nose like a dragon. So that's probably what is causing either the blockage or allowance of air to transfer from the mouth to the sinuses and nose. And so in your case, maybe your turbinods are basically blocking those.
Exactly. And, you know, so is it a handicap or is it a feature? I mean, it might actually concentrate certain aromas and blind other ones. Again, which is one of the reasons why there is no right answer. It's not like looking at a color and saying that is blue. And if you don't see blue, you're colorblind. So yeah, we'll definitely, there are.
I think for me, one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the last year and a half or so of doing these is every time we have a guest who knows their whiskey, is a lot of times people come in and they're like, oh, you guys have done a bunch of these, so you know how to taste whiskey. And we're like, no. Tell us how you do it. I want to hear your method.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting hearing how people's method is tweaked a little bit, and you always learn something new. You always find something. I remember when we had Glenn Modan on, and he really went deep into it, or how he would say he would inhale and then inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth, so that his entire senses got a taste of the whiskey.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting approach to kind of hit both of those ends. Yeah. And I've heard some people put their nose to the top rim and inhale with their mouth. Some people say, smell it with your nose. Do whatever works for you. You know, everybody's different.
Well, that is the bottom line, isn't it? It makes sense to hear different versions of what works for certain people, but there is no right way. So if you're kind of preaching that you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that, what really should be preached is you have to find out which of these versions works for you, but maybe even more importantly, know what you're changing. What all the way back to that olfactory bulb, what are you doing, and why does that improve or weaken your ability to smell? Cool. Well, let's keep going through here. I've only got 400 more slides to go. No, just joking. So this is something that I was a brewer for a dozen years, and a professional brewer, and then I dropped out of brewing, got into IT. Every brewery in Seattle does that at some point. And I got a master's in information management. And one of the things that I ended up doing, I worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, making the controlled vocabularies that we used to describe, you know, everything from education results to, you know, pathologies. I mean, it just depended on what team I was working with. And the whole idea about a vocabulary is that if you use a vocabulary that is predictable, you can get refined results. So if we actually call a compound out, or we get down to the point where we're very prescriptive in the term, we can share that and train other people to smell it and use that same term. So you've seen the aroma wheels. Well, the sad news about an aroma wheel is it's one group's aroma wheel. It's not going to be your aroma wheel. You might not be able to smell half of those aromas. The other half of the aromas that you do smell aren't on that wheel. Who made the wheel? Did they make it for Highland Scotch? Did they make it for bourbon? Did they make it for rum and somebody just put aroma wheel on it and now you're smelling it? The truth is you actually have to make your own vocabulary for your own product. So Copperworks has our aroma wheel. We don't actually have it in a wheel, we have it in a chart. But we all make these determinations by years of writing down words that we consistently smell and then training each other to use that word when we taste that thing. We even have classics Copperworks. Somebody will say, oh, that's CC, that's classic Copperworks, you know, and it has that sweetness, that maltiness, that orange spice cabinet aroma. We kind of know where we're going. And then, you know, oh yeah, but it also has so-and-so. So I'm going to encourage you to use as many aroma wheels as you can, not just one, but as many as you can find on the internet to create terms that resonate for you on a whiskey that you're interested in, or a category of whiskeys you're interested in, and then throw the damn thing away. Once you have the words that work for you, you're like, oh yeah, I smell pipe tobacco. Then you don't need an aroma wheel to remind you of that. You need your table of vocabularies that you understand and can reflect back on.
Real quick, Jason, was that aroma wheel you showed the esters that you had on that first slide?
No, this one is from Whiskey Magazine.
No. Yeah, I understand.
No.
The ester compounds that you showed on that first slide, right? Would they be evenly distributed around this aroma wheel, or would they be concentrated toward, say, the fruit, cereal, floral areas?
Yeah, they would be. Exactly. So an aroma wheel also is, you know, got some weird things. Like there will be a few sulfury notes that you might be able to get in esters, but they're almost always going to be fruity and floral. So no, that's a good question, and it's not that they're equally dispersed on an aroma wheel. And one of the challenges with an aroma wheel are those big categories. You know, why call it winey? Why, you know, I would probably have a section, a pie chart here if I was making a wheel that I would call chemical. And wine may be one of the chemicals, but we've already, you know, fingernail polish remover and, you know, terpenes, you know, floor cleaner and stuff like that would all be underneath there. But
does that other category really say Fenty?
Fenty, yeah.
Fenty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It says Fenty on the real one in a little low pixel thing. So, you know, Fenty's, you know, the end cuts, you know, the things that are going to be long, you know, long chain fatty acids. So they're going to smell rancid oils. I can't actually read any of the words on that, but maybe if we blew it up enough, we could. But so again, I think that aroma wheels are a great way to get started, a lousy way to end. If what you do when you're smelling something is you grab the aroma wheel that was published by somebody else and stop there, you're never going to grow. But if you start with an aroma wheel, use it to pick out a few words, write those words down and begin to organize them into your own personal vocabulary. And again, it's probably easier just to pick some big things like fruity, floral, spicy, wood. You know, I used chemical, but you could use, you know, if you're tasting a lot of scotches, you might use smoke, and then you define the different types of smoke. And then underneath each of those, you know, ask the question, yes, okay, smoke, what type of smoke? Is it, you know, pine smoke? Is it driftwood smoke? Is it, you know, black smoke, white smoke? Is it tar? And you can begin to answer your own questions and create your own vocabulary. So that's why I said it easily becomes a crutch rather than an aid. You need to develop your own words to really get good at this. So what you're smelling, of course, is the volatiles that escape from the whiskey. Well, if they don't escape from the whiskey, you don't smell them, which is why you do roll the whiskey. It's also why you warm the whiskey. And it's why you can lower the proof of the whiskey. So those volatiles escape. So adding the water is going to remove some things and make other things possible.
Doesn't it preferentially affect certain compounds that are hydrophobic when you add water versus compounds that aren't when you know, dilute it? So that pushes certain things out of the whiskey that, you know, were also in a sort of nice balance. So you're changing the actual whiskey. That's one you are in fact changing the actual whiskey. Remember that unless they barreled it at cask strength, the distillery also changed the whiskey before you got it. Yep.
When we bottle whiskeys, the first thing we do is we pick, you know, the 4 to 6 barrels that we think will make a good batch, and we pick them not to be consistent, but to have a variety, an interesting flavor that we can showcase. Then we proof it. We proof it at 80, 85, 90, 95, 100, 105, 110, 15, 20 in cask strength. And we taste 10 different versions of them, those 10 different versions of them, write down our descriptors, write down our preferences. And then we get down to the individuals, you know, we're like, oh, you know, I like this one at 101, but at 104, it's a little hot, but it has a much longer finish that I really like. And then we have to think about, well, what do people like? And you know, everybody seems to like our finish and always asks us to lower the proof. We normally bottle in triple digits. What I find interesting about that is when we lower the proof, we don't like the whiskey as much. It's like, oh, it's just not as complex. You know, we lose some of those volatiles, probably because of the hydrophilic nature of some of the compounds. So, yeah. So this is an interesting fact. There's about 17,000 odorous compounds that have been identified. And as we looked in that table right at the beginning of this talk with all those esters, a lot of them have the same descriptor: black cherry, green apple, red apple. So, you know, it's going to end up that just because it's a different compound doesn't mean that we detect it differently. We probably only detect about 1,200 compounds on average. I'm sure some people are way more than that, but I'm afraid some are way less than that. And you can train yourself to be more sensitive with practice. And then that last bullet in there is talking about the masking effect. So when things get really complex, and again, this is why adding water is good. When things get really complex, you can wipe out other more subtle aromas that are being dominated by something that's easier to detect, that the detection limit or the detection threshold of it is lower. So again, I feel like I'm being prescriptive here, but these are some examples of things to try. And if you probably are already doing a lot of these, you want to start with a small sip. Why do you want to start with a small sip? Why does everybody tell you to do that? Here's my experience. If it's starting with a small sip, you prevent yourself from getting so much of that alcohol down your throat that it kind of shocks your throat. It's that thing that creates all the tears, and you know, you need to cough and drink a bunch of water, and it's happened to all of us. It feels like it goes down the wrong pipe. You're going to have a lot less chance of that for the first sip being really small, and that's going to kind of loosen up, start saliva flowing down the esophagus, or the throat, I should say, and make you have a lot less chance of getting burned. I move everything around, but I was not able to do that when I was a lot younger. It just was too hot. Now, you know, 100 proof, 115 proof whiskey does not hurt at all. So I can chew it and slosh it around and move it around. That's just something I've gotten used to. And it really helps me taste a lot more, because you're getting you're getting different receptors that are adding to the texture, and it's lingering in your mouth longer, so you get more aromas. And then of course record not only the flavors and the aromas, but also its feel, its mouth feel. Some people hate that word, but I'm fine with it. It's, you know, the viscosity and the texture. Is it oily? Is it thin? Is it hot? Is it cooling? When you breathe in after swallowing, do you actually feel like you just brushed your teeth, or do you feel like it's actually causing a little flame to burn in your mouth?
Is there a specific compound that you're able to isolate for the viscosity? Like, you know, certain whiskeys that you drink that you can tell just have like a density, or like, you know, they feel, you know, viscous in your mouth. Is it like just some fatty acids, and if you were to run it through a GCMS, you could, you know, identify them, or is it not that easy? Well,
it's not that easy in general. I will tell you that specific to like our production, I know that maltodextrose and maltotriose, so the two sugars that come out of malt that are assimilated by some yeast and fermented into alcohol and CO2. In our yeast, purposefully, they're not degraded. And so that means that we are left behind with these oils, they feel oily in the mouth. They add depth and texture. And that's combined with the very narrow cuts, we get this this almost unctuous new make whiskey. And then you put that in a new barrel and you end up with all the vanillas and caramels and oak lactones coming in, and it really becomes a pretty thick and oily whiskey. So that, again, that's kind of our process. But I don't know I don't know if you could just run it through GCMS and say, you're always going to find that lipids are adding.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because isn't that the issue with chill filtering? Because you get all those people talking about, chill filtering doesn't change the flavor for the people who do it. But the other people are like, you're nuts. You're taking out the lipids. Those are going to give you like the better mouthfeel and texture, and they're fats. So how can you not, right?
Oh, this one's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, this one's good.
I'm glad to see that you guys are enjoying in the chat and hearing so much about American single malt whiskey. I agree. I think several, or at least a couple of these are American single malt whiskeys. And what's fun is what you're already doing is trying to guess which distillery. And that is making me proud of the fact that American single malt now has been recognized as a category, at least by geeks like us, and that you're interested in the differences between them instead of them just being, all the same.
It's the next big thing, American single malt. I swear, it's awesome.
Well, I'm hanging my hat on it, that's for sure. Let's talk about this one. What are we on, number 5 here? Is that right?
Yep.
What flavors are you getting? What aromas are you getting? Let's start with that.
I was saying in the chat, the cotton candy, citrus, and definitely American single malt to me.
Yep. I've tasted small Australian producers whiskey that kind of has this category, but it's virtually like American single malt, just happens to be made in Australia. So I would agree. This feels like it's well made. It's made in full-size barrels, quality casks, because I don't get that green wood sort of taste to it. So that's nice. What proof do you think it is? Or was that a question that we're supposed to answer in the poll?
I want to say 52%.
I'm saying 105.
I've run out of
105.
So that's 52 and a half.
Yeah,
Right
Sean,
there.
my guess was 104, so it's just over 100, I think.
Interesting. I've run out of witty questions to ask, so they're all going to be repetitive now. Sorry.
Okay.
I think
Which direction was the barrel facing?
I think Vadim picked these so there's no bourbon so far.
You don't
There's a
know.
coffee note that's on the palate, but I can't find it on the nose.
Interesting. Yeah. So a question for you in general, do you find it to be intriguing or a fault if the aroma doesn't lead to the flavor?
Oh, totally intriguing. I think it's like a mystery because you nose it and you think you've got it, and then you taste it and you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not what happened. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, but Kevin nailed it. It's so often when you smell something, you're like, this is going to taste fantastic. And then you taste it based upon the smell and it's not even living up to it. And you're just kind of let down.
I like it when it happens the other way.
The opposite of that with
When it smells kind of gross and then you taste it and you go, oh, wow, like cheese.
Sometimes you get a totally different set of flavors from the palate. And I don't mind that. I just don't like it when the palate's weak after a wonderful nose. That's a letdown. So it can be totally different. It doesn't need to be the same, but it needs to be at the same level or better.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think we probably would all agree mostly with that concept is that it at least has to be as interesting, if not more interesting. I have a few whiskeys in my collection that I I love the aroma of, and I really don't like the flavor, and vice versa. I love the flavors of, and I really don't like the aroma. And we've even released one whiskey that I wasn't really very impressed with the aroma at all. I couldn't even find the aroma. It was just like, oh, a little bit of wood, a little bit of vanilla. But man, I love the flavors and the tropical fruits that came through, and the depth of the finish was so great. But we didn't have enough whiskey at that time to blend in some cask that had a wonderful aroma, so we couldn't correct for it. We just simply didn't have the option. That's.
Have you ever nosed one and then tasted a different one back to back that maybe had similar components, but one was lacking in palate, the other was lacking in nose? Just curious, because if you've experienced that, I thought maybe you would have tried that. I certainly have not.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I don't remember that. But when we do taste panel, of course, what we'll end up doing every week is that we'll have 4 or 5, usually 4 cask samples of whiskey, and you just have them lettered A, B, C, and D, and there's no rhyme or reason behind them. And so when we're nosing and tasting them, they could actually all be the same whiskey, just in 4 identical casks that in fact don't taste identical at all. And so our decision is, are we going to put these 4 casks together, or are we going to pick, from the tastings we had last week, of 4 casks maybe made from the same grain bill, but a different day of distillation and different fermentation. And the answer is usually we're going to keep striving for complexity. And there was a time when we only had 100 barrels to pick from, but now that we have more, that makes it a little more fun. So yeah, I think I've tasted both of your directions, but I don't know that I've ever tasted them to the point where I've said it's exactly equal. You put 50% of one and 50% of two, and now you have both. You actually, you may know this, when you put whiskeys together, you don't get a sum of their parts, you get a new thing. And that's what's so fascinating about this. It's not like you can just add it together and go, well, here it is. I want to keep moving. Okay, we got a poll. Where was sample 5 made? Oh, that was a fun one. Yeah, good poll.
Yeah, so I want to say the kind of like both the smell and the complexity, and then different from the taste. The baller from, I think it was St. George Distillery. I can't remember, but it's in California, but it's called the Baller, and it has
St. George.
Yeah, that one, when I reviewed it, the smell and then from the taste was completely different, but both was great. It was crazy.
Oh, good. They're one of my favorite distilleries. I just love pretty much everything they do. Okay, we'll plow through a couple of more screens here. Thanks for bearing with me. I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this slide presentation. So trigeminal sense is that is literally a receptor, a nerve receptor we're going to look at in a second. I'll go ahead and show you where the trigeminal nerve is. That's that yellow thing that's in the middle of this woman's face. I'm assuming this woman, this person with long hair's face, kind of right behind the eye, but you can see that all sorts of nerve endings tie in. The bottom of the jaw, where you kind of salivate, way up behind the nose, even behind the eye. This is that nerve that can get really shanked sometimes. If you've ever drunk a soda and had that CO2 burn, that's a trigeminal effect. Or when we're tasting one of these whiskeys and we say, wow, that is really warming, that is really smooth and oily, that texture is from the trigeminal nerve. And again, as you can see, it incorporates a lot of different parts of the body, including the olfactory. So it's going to be another way of detecting your preference of something and the presence of something, like, for instance, CO2, or things that are highly volatile, or in the fact of something that's really dry and has no residual sugar, or vice versa, is really oily and has a lot of oils and fats in it. And here I am way down to whiskey 4. That's wrong. We're closer to whiskey 6 in a second here. I wanted to share this concept about detection limits, that you remember that in order to be bottled, a whiskey has to be 40% alcohol. We're not really allowed to bottle anything in America below 40 and call it a base spirit. So a gin, a vodka, whiskey, etc., has to be bottled at 40% alcohol. If you understand, the size of the molecule of alcohol is bigger than the size of the molecule in water. So really, it's not that 60% of it is water, but it's actually that 59.8% of it is water. But that's close enough to call it 60. And the difficult thing is, at least in the water that we all use for proofing, that water has no flavor. And so really all it's there to do is to dilute that alcohol. And again, that should be the distiller's choice. When you buy a whiskey that is always at a consistent proof, your distiller has decided that they're either blending enough barrels that they're going to deliver a consistent flavor to you, regardless of the changes in each of those individual oak casks, in each of the fermentation profiles, in each of the distillation profiles, and especially in each of the agronomic changes that happened that year with that crop. Like, this is a horrible year, this year, 2021, for barley. So we're going to be really suffering for barley for the next 12, 15 months. They're making the decision that you can produce consistent product, and that consistent proof is a big part of it. And that's true, that when you change the proof on something, it really changes flavor. I don't think that should be the determinant factor. I think enjoyment, should be better than consistency, but maybe I'll change my mind someday. So less than 0.2 or 1/5% of the aroma and flavors, all of the aromas and flavors that are left over are not alcohol. They're not the 59.8% water. They are the flavor compounds, the conjugars. Conjugars is another word for thingy. It just simply means something that isn't alcohol or CO2. It could be an ester, it could be an aldehyde, it could be an aliphatic acid. There's a lot of things that it might be, but it has some contribution to flavor or aroma. And so we refer to them as conjugars. There's hundreds of them. And even there, 0.2% is a little bit too high of a concentration. And so we have to dilute it with water to be able to enjoy it. So this is an interesting thing about detection limits. Detection limits have a high end and a low end. We feature the problem of the low end a lot, like I can't taste it, I can't taste it. Oh, now I can taste it. But in fact, the high end is blowing out is doing that masking effect, is blowing out other compounds that we should have been able to taste, but can't anymore. And here's an eye chart. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we pour number 6? And then let's talk about this. And I don't know how far down this slide deck number 6 is going to come, but I think we're ready for another whiskey. Do you guys agree? Let's do it. Turn off that. Feels like it's been a few minutes. I get a lot of cask influence on this one. Do you guys?
I do, and I get it. Another American single malt. At least that's what I'm feeling.
This one's one of my favorites. I just like the front of the palate, mid and finish. It's just really nice.
The finish has this type of fruit. It's almost like black cherry or some exotic fruit. And it's coming, it really does. The finish is amazing on this one. It's long. I think the high proof of this whiskey is really helping carry that finish.
Did anyone else get tobacco on the finish?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Tobacco
definitely
too.
did. I was just gonna say,
Definitely got.
big tobacco on the finish.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I get this lingering tea note throughout the entire thing. It kind of holds a lot of the other flavors together.
A lot of tannins.
Yeah. Tannins, a little drying.
Smoky tea.
This might be like the Colorado laws. I don't know, but I'm confident it's like that.
I'm getting some of the weather tannins like I'm used to from like Garrison Brothers on this.
Mhm. Do you get just I already heard tobacco and then tannins and tea. Do you get a type of almost smokiness to it that could be coming from the barrel, but could be coming from something else? Does anybody pick that up?
I get some spice
Yeah,
on
'cause
this. is what I
Hint,
get.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I get that totally.
Yeah. I have an idea what a few of these are, but I'm really looking forward to the reveal.
So we're gonna do a couple more polls, but Jason, you do know you're gonna be the first one put on the spot. Just
Yeah, you got to give us your picks on what these are.
Well, so and now that everybody's tasted, let's do the sample 6. Where do you think this was made? Having been the one that poured all of these, and I was looking forward to tasting them all, this one surprised me the most.
Man, you're making me question my choice.
that's
Stop playing mind games with us.
that's all today is about for me. I'm just sitting here on the little tricycle. Let's play a game.
Oh, I know you're enjoying this thing way too much.
Exactly right, David.
I don't know about too much, but I'm enjoying it a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just not getting any corn notes on any of these, just saying.
Right.
Oh wait, that question is coming, Jordan. All right, everybody voted. There we go, 19. Somebody's been voting all the votes this whole time. Next fun one. This one's for Jordan.
Wow, funny.
So Jason, are you done with the class portion? Are we now into the discussion, or do you have more to teach?
Let me go. I think I got a couple more things, and I also think that we don't need to drain all of these slides too much more. But I did want to just go through record keeping real briefly. Do any of you, and I'm looking at the screen, so I'm not able to see your hands or anything, so just come off mic if you want to say yes or come on to mic. How many of you use a journal that you kind of standardize your type of writing? Do people do that?
I do, definitely, all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a journal. Yep, I do.
Great. Do you guys use anything pre-printed, or did you just open up a notebook and begin to write your notes?
Blank notebook.
Like notebook.
Mhm.
Good.
I do mine online, so I can put it on my phone.
Yeah, just a notebook.
Nice. That's in my opinion, that's best. And the reason I think that's best is because you get to decide what you measure. But it's not a bad idea to take a look at some of the tools that people are using. Spidergraph. Spidergraph is where you have this kind of what is the intensity of the smoke? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is the intensity of the grain? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is and they're all spidering out from a circle, and then you put your dot down, and then you draw a line, and it looks like a spider web. And the interesting thing about that is you can quickly find a whiskey in your collection that accentuates one over another. At least that's what you thought that day. So my biggest point about record keeping is that if you do it, then you're practicing the art of tasting and you're going to learn. And if you don't do it, it's going to be difficult to progress very much unless you're just drinking quite often, all the time, and just really seriously thinking about it. So definitely consider writing down things. I write the texture, I write about the flavor, the finish, the balance. We talked already about, do the aromas predict the flavor, and how important or not is that? Oh gosh, overall, the intrigue of it. A lot of the times you may even ask the question, is, even though it's really good, is it worth it? I happen to have one whiskey in my collection that I keep buying, and it keeps going up in price, and it's still, this is going to sound strange, but it's actually my favorite whiskey. I don't really normally say I have a favorite of anything, no favorite beer, no favorite wine, but the Redbreast 21 has for several years, which is an Irish whiskey of all things, I don't know why it's so delicious to me, blows me away in its complexity. And every time I taste it, I'm amazed. And I have to say, it's too expensive. It's about $300 a bottle now, and yet I will always have one. And that's about the only time when I'm going to spend that amount of money on a whiskey that isn't got something else going for it. Well, that's got a lot going for it in flavor, but I mean, there's no story behind it that I'm really trying to focus on.
And it's bottled at 40%.
Yes. So
that always hurts.
I know. Although I'm not drinking it to get a buzz. I'm drinking it to enjoy it. And I do not add water to that because, like you said, it's already at 40%. It's sort of amazing.
But do you not feel that even if you're not chasing a buzz, which I almost never am, I feel like whiskeys bottled at 46 tend to generally be non-chill filtered, give me more flavor than those bottled at 40.
I agree with you in general, and that's why this bottle continues to amaze me. It is iconoclastic in that way. It defies a lot of the standard logic on what's the right way to shop for whiskey. I've already mentioned this, adding water. So the reasons to add water: to learn, to enjoy first, and a few drops do that, and then to learn. And I mentioned proofing down to the point where all you taste are the raw wood, sweet, char, sour, and grain flavors. That's worth doing. What to record? I don't think I need to go through this. We already talked about what is important, and you have a copy of this. And then ranking and scoring is a fun exercise, and I think it's worthwhile to rank the 4 major components: rank the nose, rank the palate or the taste, rank the finish, rank the overall balance of kind of the whole overall whiskey, and use those numbers to compare, because as we know, one can be exceptional and the other one falls flat. So it is nice to be able to go back and find that whiskey that you thought, I really like the nose on this one. And so I want to learn more about what caused that. So I use a 5-star scale. Some people use a 10-point scale. I use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. Or now that I'm lazy, I just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In Taste Panel, we use 1 through 9. So we actually have 10 scores, 1 and then through 9. And I have to say, we don't really almost ever use a 1 or a 9. As a matter of fact, we almost never use a 2 or an 8. So, and then if you haven't already thought about this, if you are trying to improve your ability to taste, always taste blind if you can, because tasting blind is going to remove all of the preconceived notions of price, of what it should be like, what its category is. Taste all over the map. Be sure that you are using your words if you really feel them. Don't just borrow the words. We already talked about the importance of taking notes. I perform threshold experiments, but I'm going to say for the most part, you just may want to know if somebody else keeps telling you that they don't taste the thing you taste. that almost is enough to know. But if you really would like to, you can try to learn what your threshold is. And then by practice radical honesty simply means be true to yourself, even though you want to like it. If you don't, be honest that you wasted a lot of money on this bottle. Vice versa, if you don't think you should like this, and yet everybody is, telling you how awful it is, but brown sugar bourbon's your favorite, go for it. Write it down as a top notch. Okay, here we go. If you guys feel like writing me, I would love to hear from you. That's my email address. I'm Jason at copperworksdistilling.com. That's my cell phone number down there, so you can send me texts in the middle of the night. I won't get them, but I'll wake up in the morning and they'll be there. So I'll look at them then. Well, let's talk about some of these things, and I want to see some of the chats. I really dislike writing. But yeah, you may find that it's easier just to make a scribble, of a spider graph and say, I like this.
Hey, Jason.
Yep.
So you say maintain a ready biophysical and mental state. So, and I'm sorry if I just spaced out and completely missed this, but like, what would you suggest we do to kind of maintain that?
So, you're getting into something above my pay grade, which is, how do you relax and how do you actually really be honest with yourself? I'm going to say, go into it with the assumption that you don't have to be right. Even though you thought you'd know what this is like. I'm guilty of this when I go into a new distillery. If I'm in Scotland, I'm just overwhelmed by the fact that I'm in Scotland, and I think all of their whiskeys taste about 20% better than they do when I come home. And so I don't know if you've had that experience, but when I'm in some kind of scrappy craft distillery, sometimes I don't expect it to be that good, and I want to be more blind in my tasting. I'd like to have none of that background and just be able to just enjoy it. So if you're able to just relax your perceptions, I think that will give you a better tasting experience and probably be more reproducible in the future for you.
So when you do this stuff, Jason, what is it you, as sort of this expert on this, would say in the following scenario, which, I, and I'm sure other people here have encountered, where, people who maybe don't have the sense memory or broad tasting experience, you're like, oh, hey, try this scotch. You pour them like a, called a Macallan 12 or some Speyside that's, pretty standardized whiskey. And like, oh, wow, that's really good. I really like the peat in that. That's really peaty. Right? How do you, and I have my way and I've done this myself, but how do you approach that kind of scenario?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest with you, it happens every day in the tasting room. So we have people that will come in and say, you know what, I don't like whiskey, I only like bourbon.
Yep.
Or they'll use another term that makes me understand they don't fully understand the products. I gently lead them in the direction. So if they say, I really like the peat in this, and I'll say, what are you tasting? Describe it. And they'll say, well, it's got this kind of bitter, smoky, tannic thing. And I'm thinking, I bet that's the barrel. And so I'll say, does it taste kind of woody? And, I'll lead them in the right direction. If necessary, I might pop their bubble and say, it turns out this whiskey really doesn't have any peat, but what you're probably tasting is coming from, the char of the barrel or the caramelization of the wort in the kettle. There's a lot of things that it could be. And ultimately, just meet them where they are. They, as you know, when you ask people who don't taste whiskey, what do you taste? The first word they say is, well, it tastes like whiskey. And then if they ask one more thing, they'll say, I think I get vanilla if it's a bourbon, or caramels if it's pretty much any other whiskey. And so I always accept that as a good answer, right? Because they pretty much are there. And then you can ask them, do you get any other flavors? And that's when the power of suggestion comes in. You can start saying, do you taste any fruit? And, people will pick a fruit. If they really taste one, they'll defend it by naming it. you know, what type of fruit, what part of the fruit. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Have you guys left a little bit of whiskey, or maybe even a lot of whiskey of some of these in your glass so
Yes.
that you can go back and nose them? Are you recognizing the same thing that I mentioned earlier that I bet you always do, which is that they smell very different than they did when we first poured them? Right. So when and we've been on this call for almost 2 hours, so it's obviously a different thing than when you're only giving it a half an hour. But the fact is, some of them have gotten worse and some of them have gotten better, or certain parts of them have gotten better and certain parts of them have gotten worse. I find that fascinating. That's like, what in the hell's going on? Well, those early volatiles are gone. Oxidation is actually happening in the glass. We're detecting new compounds that weren't there before. And I think it's really fun as things build up and hang out on the glass for the first time. But different spices, I can, on number 2, I get a lot more raw wood than I had ever determined when we first poured it.
I got almost a cedar on number 2.
Exactly, yeah.
Number 2 for me went to like cherry cordial. It's like amaretto and cherries.
Wow.
This has been amazing. I will say that off the first polls, most of them, people voted majority correctly. And I want to be respectful. I know, Jason, you got an early morning tomorrow, so I'm going to start doing the reveals now. People feel free to go back through and taste and share tasting notes. But I guess first things first, we've all tasted, we've all voted for different things. 2 of the expressions tonight were Copperworks. Jason, do you want to tell us a little bit about Copperworks? Tell us about the expressions we had, and can you tell us can you guess which ones were the Copperworks? That's
Yeah. I know, right? It was kind of funny. I was being a little careful there not to blurt that out when I finally tasted them. And I was actually happy to hear some of the nice comments that you guys were saying, because I was like, oh, that one I think is my whiskey, or our whiskey. So now I've mixed up my glasses. I think it was number 3. Let me taste. Nope.
4?
4, yeah.
Yeah.
Is release 38, I'm guessing. The way I know that is it's from a grain called Baroness. So real quickly, what Copperworks is all about is making a beer with no hops and distilling it. I would spend another 2 hours telling you what I mean by that sentence, of beer with no hops, but let me just shorten it by saying we do a very different mash profile than any of the traditional distilleries do, but we do a almost exactly to the T mash profile of what breweries do. And same thing with fermentation profile. So if you've ever visited a quality brewery and you're learning all about their mash program and their fermentation program, that's what we do. And that's going to be dramatically different than traditional. So in release number 4, we have a Baroness malt. That malt was grown in one farm in the world that happens to be over in Colfax, Washington, so the east side of the state, by a guy named Bill Myers on his farm, Joseph's Granary. It's only grown in one place because that whiskey, or that barley, is seed patent is owned by Monsanto now. They bought it from a smaller farm seed manufacturer, and they don't want to make it. And Bill's been growing it for 35 years and he wants to keep it. So we've decided to keep that barley alive by making a whiskey every year. This is the 5th year we've produced it, and the 1st year we've released it. 95% of the whiskey was aged in new charred American oak with a number 1 char, 2-year age staves, so 24-month age staves, and a long toast and a number 1 char. And then the, let's see, it would be the last one that we thought had some really interesting, yeah, that's number 38. It's kind of disappearing a little bit. There it goes. So you can see by on the bottom there, but by your finger actually is a number. And that number 38 is telling you that's the 38th whiskey we've made. It's different than the 37 before. We'll never be able to make it again. We still have a little bit of that one left. We just bottled number 39 today, and I have to say I love it even more. It's I'm always in favor, in love with our newest child.
So 4 is 38.
Yeah,
And
6 is 34 is my guess. Yep, sure enough. So this is the first peated whiskey made from peat in America. This peat came from Shelton, Washington, about an hour and a half south of us, southwest of Seattle. And peat, as you know, comes from a bog. The peat that we're familiar with in Scotland and Ireland, that peat is very phenolic, is mainly sphagnum moss. This peat is actually the same peat that Westland is working on. We have both worked with Skagit Valley Malting. We made our first batches of peat whiskey the same week that Westland did from Washington collected peat. The difference is we put ours in new charred American oak. They put theirs in used bourbon cask. I wasn't going to release this until theirs was ready. So I pulled it out, I put it in stainless steel, was going to sit on it for 2 years. When theirs finally was ready, we were going to co-release. And then COVID came, and then we had no money. Nobody was buying, you know, all the bars and restaurants were closed and our tasting room was closed. So I called them up and I said, guys, I got to sell this stuff. You know, I'm sorry. I promised you I would wait, but I got to sell it. And they're like, stay open, man, do whatever you can, you know, sell it. So we released this. The reason I want to give so much credit to Westland is they had the wherewithal, meaning both the intellect and the money to make that happen. That peat was mined in Shelton, moved to Skagit Valley Malting, turned into the world's first American peat barley.
In your One Nation Under Whiskey podcast, you mentioned you weren't sure. Since then, there's phenols even in American peat, right? Just not maybe the same exact phenol compounds, because phenols are a group, right?
They are. They're a 6-chain double bond carbon. I don't know that there are any in here. We have never done any analysis, so I won't say no and I won't say yes.
Okay.
So when no one tasted peat on it, because it isn't what we think of as peat. We think of peat as being Scottish peat because that's what we've only been introduced. It's like when people think that rye is what, well, should we back up? It's like when people think that what MPG produces is what all rye tastes like. That's because we've tasted 40 different rye whiskeys and they've all come from MPG. They just have different labels on them, and we didn't realize that there's other ways to taste rye until we've, you know, explored more. So this is a peat, the first release of that peat. Each year, Skagit Valley Malting worked at getting more and more peat character in, but what they really got was more and more smoke character in. And it got to the point that by the 5th year, it tasted like an ashtray. So we've asked them to back down on the amount of smoke that they're getting. This isn't really, this was produced in the way the Scottish do. And for the most part, the peat was burned, the smoke was injected into the green malt as it was drying. The smoke adheres to that malt while it's still wet. But later batches were finished malt that was then smoked with that same peat smoke, and it came off being more ashy than kind of campfirey, which I think of this one as having, if anything, it smoky wise, if anything, it has a little bit of kind of a driftwood campfire flavor to me. That's why I asked you guys if you picked up any smoke at all.
So I'm glad you recognized that one to make sure that I didn't mess up on pouring these, because yeah, that was the one I was most interested in, and I put it at the end for a very specific reason. Here's another poll for the group. I'm going to run it real quick. 2 of the answers are a giveaway already. So 5 out of 6 were American single malt. Pick out the non-American single malt. And yes, Kevin and Jordan, there was no rye or bourbon in this.
Yeah.
It was just too vast to go all whiskey. I had to pick a category to make it more interesting, because if I went rye, bourbon, it would have just been too easy.
Oh, I'm gonna go for what's obvious, and it's probably wrong.
Right. Number one.
I just had you click it. I just saw your the number Scott go, and I think you got it. Has everybody voted? We got 17 out of 21. I'm gonna shut it down. 3, 2, 1. All right, everyone's voted. Okay, so I'm gonna start announcing these. If there's a specific order you want me to go in, I can, but I think some of these will shock you. So to answer that question, number 1 was the classic. To set the palate, Glenlivet 12.
Yeah.
And just about everyone got it. I want to say, so 68% voted number 1 was not American. So that was a Scottish single malt. I was trying to go super classic on this one. I had a lot of ideas of what to throw out to be interesting and unique and all this stuff, but I wanted something that was absolutely classic. It wasn't a sherry bomb, so I didn't go for Macallan.
Would I have said that was Glenlivet 12 though? The problem is I don't drink Glenlivet 12, so I wouldn't have known that's what it was.
I mean, that's the entry for most people. I don't know. I was gonna go with Glenmorangie 10. I just couldn't find my bottle, so I went with Glenlivet 12. Either way, classic, Speyside, single malt. I figure when people think single malts, they think this. That was the idea.
That's exactly it.
No matter
no-
Macallan. But that's
Well,
what-
Macallan, the thing is, Macallan's sherry. Everybody thinks of the sherry cask, and I didn't want to go full sherry maturation because nobody else was full sherry maturation. I was trying to keep it kind of as hard to guess as possible. Let me reveal the poll for number 2. Let's see. So number 1, the poll question was, where do you think this was made? And 53% guessed Scotland, Ireland, US. So it was all over the place, but most people guessed Scotland. So that was really good. Good job, everyone. For sample number 2, obviously it was an American single malt, but 50% guessed barley. A lot of people guessed rye. 33% guessed rye, and
Really?
17% guessed corn, as you can see in the poll. That was pretty interesting. By the way, Jason, just so you know, for this one, I thought it would be fun for this tasting for the blind to kind of pit Copperworks against its fellow American single malt founding members, because you're finally going to get approved, hopefully.
Yes.
I thought this would be a all-in-one kind of cheers to American single malt finally, hopefully getting approval.
Yeah.
I did forget to raise a glass, so cheers to you. Cheers to this American single malt. Everyone grab a glass. Hopefully you still have something left. This has been so fun and enticing. We appreciate you taking the evening to spend it with us.
It's been a real treat. Thank you.
Let's get Theo, John, Whiskey Grillin' Time. Let's get everyone on camera.
And
Who
the
hacked
hacker.
my name? I don't know.
Come on, hacker.
All right, we're gonna go in 3, 2, 1. Everyone smile to the camera. Cheers. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right.
So we're really grateful.
Number 2 was
So number 2 was Westward single malt. It was their core line. It was 45% alcohol. So for the most part, I put these in ABV order, just to make it simple. But I did switch them up towards the end, which I think you will all appreciate. Let me see.
There's the third poll. Which cask was it?
Yep. So let me stop sharing this. So third poll was, how was it aged? This one threw everyone for a loop. How many people thought this was peated? Let me see a show of hands. So many people thought it was peated. I think David thought it was peated. Yeah, a bunch of people thought it was peated. Sean, David. Yeah, here's the results. So for number 3, 72% said ex-bourbon, 28% said wine cask, which means what? That's 100% of people voted. 13-5. This was actually aged in virgin American oak. It's the Westland American oak.
I should have recognized that. You know what it is? This one has that recipe of the 5 different malts. And that what we're tasting, and I should have recognized that, of course, because I've tasted a lot, is that chocolate malt, that 320 Lovibond malt coming through.
Yeah.
And it's throwing us off because it adds that chocolatey kind of roast flavor in the back.
Yeah, this is the one I think we said a bunch of us thought it was Highland Pete, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Talking all over it about Pete.
Everybody thought it was peated. That was a fun one. And this one is the one that they discontinued. This was their original American oak. I was able to get my hands on a bottle. So this was a fun treat. I'm glad I threw a curveball at y'all.
What was the AB 45?
I did get a.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I said I did get a big coffee note on that one. Like, but not like coffee, like coffee candy, like the fake coffee flavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that coffee is that specialty malt that's in the grain bill.
Yeah, like old coffee that's been sitting in the cup. Not that that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so is this the one that has on the barley bill on their site, Washington pale malt, Munich malt, extra special malt, pale chocolate malt, and brown malt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was exciting. Number 3 was Westland American Oak, American single malt. And Jason, I'm so glad you were able to pick out the 2 Copperworks because the only peated one was yours.
I know.
And so
funny.
for having I didn't try any of these samples before tonight. So I was literally sitting here like, did I mislabel 3 and 6? Did I just give everybody 6 as 3 and everybody's saying it's peated? And I'm freaking out. And I'm like, and when we got to 6, I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who thinks this doesn't taste peated. I loved number 6 because I'm not a big peat person. So for all the sentimental reasons of being the first American peated single malt to be released, I'm gonna have to get a bottle just to have it in my collection. That's amazing.
It's really fun. It reminds me of when Balvenie did a peat cask. They took their standard whiskey and they put it into an Ardbeg cask or something, but only for a few weeks or a few months or something. It had this very subtle little flavor in the background. It was very nice, but this is even less than that.
So what was number 5? That's the only one left.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
I have number 4 pulled up, and most people got it right. Actually, number 4 is bottled at 50%.
Yep.
Number 4 is 50%. 63% of the people got it right. Good job. 12 people voted for that. And then let's look at number 5. So majority of the people voted Washington for number 5. Funny enough, number 5 is our friends at Balcones.
I voted Texas. I
it
thought
is
that's what that
Balcones.
was. Yeah.
I reached out to them and I said, hey, if I was going to throw in one bottle of yours and an American single malt head to head, which one do you want thrown in? And they said Lineage right off the bat. So that's what we went with. It's their new release. It's essentially their single malt watered down.
And
to 47.
Yeah. I think that one's got a lot more used oak in it.
Is it? Okay.
I don't think I've ever had that. Okay, interesting.
What's the proof on that one, Vadim?
So this one's 47%. 94.
Yeah.
So let's see that. So 32% voted 6 people voted Washington, 4 people voted Texas, 3 New Mexico. It was all over the place. 2 in Oregon, 1 in California, 2 this is not American.
There's no way to really tell. I mean, you're guessing what distillery it is.
Yeah.
So I think most people just thought it was Westward and pick Washington, I would think.
And
all right, so
yeah, that's delightful. That's
where was number 6 made? Most people voted for US, and then a few people voted for bourbon, and of course none of this was bourbon. So yeah, Jason, you guys are doing a fundraising round. You want to tell us all about it?
Well, the short story is, thank you for the opportunity. The short story is we are growing to the point where we right now partner with 3 breweries. The Pike Brewery, I was their first brewer in 1989. We opened up that place. We partner with Elysian Brewery. I hired their founders 30 years ago. That was Dick Cantwell And we now partner with Fremont Brewing. None of them can make enough beer for us. We drive over there and use their brew house for a day, and we need to be doing that all the time. So we want to build our own brewery, and we found a 1.7 acre lot up in Kenmore, which is north of Seattle by about 15 miles. We also are going to open up a little pub and barrel tasting room up there. And then at the same time, the building right next door went vacant. And so we can expand our tasting room to have a little cocktail bar and an event space. So we're raising money on what's called, good grief, not WeFunder, but well, it'll come to me in a second. We're raising money. Let me just leave it like that on Start Engine. Thank you. And what we're going to do with that money is build those capacities out. And so if you're interested, go to copperworksdistilling.com and you'll find all sorts of information that you can become a shareholder. You can become my boss. I'd love to have you as my boss. One of many bosses, actually.
Yeah.
What's your funding goal?
5 million. We're at 1.2 the last time I looked.
No, David, you can't just call them and just do it. Take it all for yourself. We want a chance to.
You want to participate as well?
David's like, oh, only that? I got you.
No, it sounds very exciting, particularly since it's not like a GoFundMe where you don't have any interest or share in the company. But I understand that what you're saying, Jason, is that any person that contributes, and I imagine you have a minimum threshold.
We do.
Then that's
$250
on a share, and then.
Yep, that's right. So shares are 53 cents a piece, and the minimum investment is $250. And so, you get quite a few shares for that. And then the maximum investment in crowdfunding is 107,000. So you can't go over that, but we'd love you to try. And so all of this is a way to really kind of become part of the fold. We've got a lot of incentives out there, but the biggest incentive is to, if you liked what you tasted in number 4 and you liked what concept you're tasting in number 6, to be able to help us continue to do this. I think we've done a lot of research and thinking about the flavors, and now we just need to reproduce them and get them out of Washington. We're stuck without enough juice to leave Washington. So we want to come to California, but we don't have the liquor yet.
Can you talk about the expressions that you are currently producing in Washington?
I can. So as you saw, we've got 30, we tasted 38, and today we bottled 39, released 39. So each one of them is different. We have 3 main focuses. We focus on single farm, single variety, single vintage malts. So I told you the story about the Baroness. I also told you the story about the peated. Each whiskey we release has a storyline behind it. There's something that we're experimenting with and learning about. The second thing that we're working on, you tasted in release number 3, you tasted the Westland 5 malt recipe. They're not making it anymore, but we've been making a 5 malt recipe for a long time since we opened. It was based on the last beer I made at Copperworks that was at Pike Place Brewery that was called the Kilt Lifters, this 9% Scotch ale. So we take that concept and we brew it, and then we distill it into whiskey. That 5 malt is another delicious flavor. You didn't get to taste that tonight, but it's the thing I want to make a lot more of and have that as a category. And then the last one we want to do is really focusing on our partnerships with breweries, have brewers participate in our brew house, bringing their grains, their yeast, and their mash program. We will distill it, no hops, thank you, but we will distill it into whiskey and then mature that into finished whiskey from their grain bill. So it's kind of following the whole beer into whiskey theme. And that's kind of what all of our bottles right on the top of them. Great brewing comes great spirits, and that's our background. Yeah.
So I'm a neophyte. I do not know Copperworks at all, so I appreciate this evening and the conversation. You do not sparge anything. You're not taking, so you're not mashing. You're just taking what breweries have made for you and then distilling it.
No, that's not exactly right. So what we decided to do, I'm going to give you a little bit longer story without taking too much of your time. We live here in the Seattle waterfront. When we moved in, we were going to build our own brewery and our own distillery in this single footprint. And it became a historic landmark. And the historic landmark board said you can't have grain silos outside. You can't have a spent grain truck out here because we got plans for this city that won't work. So we partnered with my brewery friends to use their brew house. So we ship 5,300 pounds of whichever grain we're going to use to one of those 3 breweries. We do the mash, we do the sparge, we do a full regular sparge. We don't do the type that Scottish distillers do, where they kind of fill everything up with liquor, drain it all the way dry, fill it back up, drain it dry, fill it up the 3rd time, and use that for the mash on the next batch. We actually do what a brewery does, sparge at the same time we're running off. We boil to sanitize and concentrate. No distillers do that. All brewers do that. We then cool. We bring that sweet wort over here. We pitch it with brewer's yeast, not distiller's yeast, that we get from the brewery that we're working with, Elysian Brewery at that time. And then we ferment for 7 days, cold condition for 14 more days, and then begin distilling. So all of the fermentation and distillation happens here on site.
And you're doing a really long fermentation, right?
Yeah, well, if you add the cold conditioning and the fermentation in, it's 3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. No one does. People talk about, we do like 96 hours and that's like super long. And so you're doing 3 weeks, which is insane, right?
It is, and it gives us flavors. If you've ever had a green beer, if you've ever had a beer that's, say you were a home brewer and you tasted your beer after 72 hours of being in the fermenter, it'd be horrible. I mean, it'd have tons of yeast in it and it would still be very, well, the word that we all use is green, but what it means is that it just doesn't have any mature flavors to it. But you come back in a couple of weeks after conditioning that, and that beer is delicious. And that's what all breweries do. They lager their beer, they age their beer. And during that, think of like the way a casserole flavors get better the second day than right when you pull it out of the oven. It's the same thing that happens in beer. Well, we do that because we drop all the yeast out into the tank. We don't get any autolysis, which is where yeast breaks open, autolysis, autolysis. That ends up tasting meaty, kind of rubbery. We don't want those flavors. We pick out those flavors in scotches. We're like, nope, don't want that. It also reduces the chance of any hop oils because we're literally using real yeast from a brewery, not yeast that's powdered or dried from a commercial yeast producer. So this is fresh yeast. So the whole purpose behind all of this is to emulate everything that we did as brewers and then distill it. And with the goal of really high quality brewing science meets really high quality and traditional distilling, on Scottish stills. These are the stills behind me. You've seen them in the pictures. That is really making, I think, a kind of a new category of whiskey. Not just American single malt, but whiskey that's literally made from beer with no hops. So thanks for letting me ramble on about that. I love talking about it, but there's.
Oh, we appreciate the information. We really do.
Yeah, I'm already on your start engine looking to see how if we each put in $500, we can do the lunch with you. I'm down for that.
Yeah. I think I would have to come to you. I don't think it would be reasonable to ask all of you to come up to me. So yeah, we'd have to do that. That'd be a blast.
Oh no, horrible.
You'd have to come to sunny California. Sorry.
I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll wait until it's not fire season, which I know is over now. But man, what a bummer.
Yeah, I'm looking at your website, and what was the first cut 2021? That looks fantastic. 65%. Tell us more about that.
No, that's a really great question. Off the top of my head, Adam, I do not remember what the cask is. So The first cut program is a way for us to make sure that when we make a release that we don't sell out before our best and favorite, customers, or the ones that have been buying from us every day or every year, get a chance to see it. So we said, you know what, we're going to give you 7 days early. We're going to give you the first cut. And it's kind of a pun on, the words cut. And that gives them 7 days to buy before we release to the general public. We make a cask strength single cask release just for that group. So it comes along with the membership, that year membership. So that membership's I think $120, and you get the cask and then first dibs on everything we have. And so we release between 5 and 7 whiskeys a year that are generally available. I mean, we do some very special whiskeys for some restaurants in town, but of course we don't have access to them. So those are only, I'm not counting those.
Jason, do you have a social media person?
We do. We just hired one about 5 days ago.
Okay.
So
Are
they've
you
been there
doing
a
it?
while.
And relate to that, are you doing any single cask like sales at all?
Yes. So we just picked out, we did a taste panel this week that we were looking specifically for single cask. We ended up finding 3 casks that we're probably going to release 2 of them this year, before the end of the year, I should say, as single cask. We tend to do between 1 and 3 single cask a year. If you guys want to geek out sometime, go to copperworksdistilling.com. Go to the products page. You'll see there's a section up there that says, what does it say? It says something like spirits. And then under whiskey, you will see past whiskey releases. And when
Yeah, that's how I found it. 38, the 38 info's on there, right?
Yeah, so actually every info is on there. So like starting at the very top, you'll see the, each release 1, release 2, release 3. And then there's a hyperlink at the bottom that says of each release, it says production notes. So when you click on that, it'll open a PDF. And that PDF has got every brew, every distillation, every wash and spirit distillation, every barrel, every blend that we've ever done to make that release. And then how many bottles we got, what proof we proofed it to, etc. So it's just kind of a ridiculous amount of information, not super easy to consume, but once you've gone through 38 of them, you'll be pretty masterful at it. So that gives you a feeling of all the different types of whiskeys we make, and also kind of our commitment to being transparent. There's a couple in there that are missing some notes like that because, well, frankly, we didn't take the time to put everything together, and they ended up like, I think number 7 and 8 are missing some.
How many expressions do you currently have on the market right now?
Right now in our distributor, we have 3. We have 38, 34, a little bit of residual 35. 35 is almost all distributed out.
And on a
The
yearly
tasting
basis, how
room-
many expressions do you want to maintain?
None. As soon as one sold out forever. It's gone forever. And then we go to the next one. And so you remember me, you guys have been following a little bit about what's going on with Westland, and that you know that Westland is leaving their 3 core expressions and going to one bigger expression, in which actually they're using a lot of that core expression juice to accomplish that. So what's interesting about what we're trying to do is we're trying to make one of our core expressions be all of these experiments. We're trying to make another core expression be the 5 malt whiskey. And we're trying to make the 3rd core expression be a thing we can't even do today, which is to invite brewers to brew their beer at our brewery and turn that into whiskey.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. The reason I'm asking these questions is trying to be a little bit more probative of the process and understanding it, because it is
different,
fun, and I really wish a member or former member who was here could be here, because he was always very good about making a very theatrical type of comments on experiences like these.
Yeah.
His name was Coleman Thaxton, and he's a great guy, and we miss him. so one of the things was, you want to be in the front of the train as opposed to the back. Being in the front is kind of what people that you are offering, that they can be in initial sort of funding sources, be investors, have the opportunity to do, which is a truly front of the train type of experience, and it doesn't cost that much, and it's to be able to be part of that group. And I think you said the minimum investment is
$250.
250 is for some of us what we spend on a bottle.
Right. Yeah. So it gives you an opportunity to play along and kind of follow along. The good news is we ship direct to consumer in California. So you literally can play along. You can get those expressions delivered to your house.
And the other comment about the social media is asking about that is because we have a pretty broad reach, not only in Southern California, but throughout the state. And I've also noticed that it looks like we have the Albuquerque, New Mexico group that was here earlier. If they're still on, that's awesome. Really glad you guys are here. But we do cross into other countries. And I think that the offer that I would extend, and I think that Vadim and John are still here, which are on the board of directors, we would probably welcome, because though we don't have a quorum, we would have a majority, as we would welcome the opportunity for your social media person to do occasional posts on our group.
That'd be fun.
Also be able to kind of move over to the Orange County Bourbon Society, and then move over to maybe the Southern California. Those guys are all into tater bottle chasing, so I don't know about them. But there's an opportunity where folks, would have no problem doing $250 to be able to support a brand that they kind of like or enjoy. Yeah. And I think the social media component is, you could then take a recording like this, pull out parts of it, do a little TikTok, do a little Facebook, do a little whatever, and then be able to kind of get some additional exposure, because you're trying to raise, on whole, not that much money.
That's
$5
right.
million for a distillery is kind of small.
That's
and I'm
right.
thinking that for you to be able to provide that opportunity to people is unique, as opposed to, if you found the right person, they would write you a check.
Right. And we actually don't want that. The reason that we're trying to do it this way is because we do feel like we're creating a group of brand ambassadors who really enjoy what we're doing and are following along. And that's more important to us than just having the money, is having the support.
Well, I have family up in Seattle, and so if I were to give you guys a few bucks, I would really love to be able to go in and say hi.
Yeah. Hey, I'm your boss today.
No, I would never. It's like, hi, I'm one of the investors at a very small level. I just want to go in and have fun and drink really good whiskeys. And I think that everybody that's here, and the majority that are in our 1,800 membership, would be advocates for that as well.
That'd be great. Well, we should try to figure out how to follow up on that, because I would love to.
Jason,
guy to talk to, and he can make it happen. We have the group. We have 1,800 members, and again, many of them are in various other groups. Bino, who is also a strong advocate, has lots of broad reach as well, and Jason too. I mean, there's a lot of us here that are, because Jason is in Sauter is in Michigan.
Okay.
And so he has a huge following as an individual person who advocates for whiskey, and if it's something that he likes, he probably would. I can't speak for him, but there's opportunities that are kind of fun. This is all fun.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if the distillery wants to send olive oil or dressing to Michigan, we accept those kinds of shipments all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also accept those shipments to Albuquerque as well. Olive oil is great.
Yeah, here in Utah, that'd be the same. I do have a way to get you on Fox as well, if you ever want to do that.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Wow.
Locally here in Utah. I've been on it twice. I'm actually going to be on it again a third time, and they actually like me coming back all the time.
Well, our biggest challenge, of course, is that we don't have distribution in a lot of states. So we do ship direct to consumer to 37 states, but we don't have full distribution. So getting on networks and stuff like that would actually be a little bit problematic, because we can't support that much sales yet. We have to actually make more whiskey before we can grow to new markets.
But that's the angle. I mean, and I think that one thing that Julius is really good about, which is the whiskey grilling time that you see there. So Julius Vasquez, and by the way, he does not get olive oil; he gets barbecue sauce.
I definitely do.
So the comment would be that Julius does have a platform in Utah for the local Fox station, and I would imagine that his efforts are going to continue to expand. So if it's not this year, it could be next year, where Copperworks could reach out and say, "Hey, this is a really great thing. You want to be a part of it? Go sign up. Maybe in 2 years, you're going to be able to have it shipped directly to you, or it's going to be available at your local bottle shop."
Yeah. I would be, I wouldn't be able to promise that it would be at the bottle shop, but I probably can ship it. So
If nothing else, Utah's what, a short trip away from Washington? You guys are not. that
I
far.
can be there in 14 hours.
Well, no, other way around. Utah people can drive to Washington.
Got it.
They're going
If
to make their
Westland
own
can get
train.
in our-
They
in
need
our
a train
state,
conductor.
You have a chance. Westland's in here, so you got a chance.
Cool.
For sure.
That'll take less time to drive up there than it does to make a beef brisket. I think you'd be fine.
Well,
just greet him with a beef brisket, and all will be good.
I'll start the journey and you put the meat in, and then we'll see.
There
That
you
would be
go.
fantastic.
That's easy.
Oh, don't tempt him. Julius will have the meat on the grill tonight.
Jason, thank you very much for. Vadim said earlier that you have an early morning, so we want to be respectful of your time. I think again, please do stay in touch with him and to kind of get him any sort of resources, things that we might be able to do to kind of help you support your efforts to raise a reasonable amount of money, and then to establish a relationship, because like me, there's probably a lot of us have not heard about Copperworks. So we're excited to be able to help your brand, help your work, and help your efforts. You're definitely a professional in the industry, and thank you for taking the time of your evening to be and spend it with us and share your knowledge.
You're welcome. It was really a pleasure to be able to be with you guys, and thanks for the good advice. And I'm also happy that Adam reached out to me and made this happen. I appreciate the time you've put into this. I know at times you probably wondered, is this guy ever going to get back to me in the email? So glad you were able to pull it off, Adam. Good job.
Vadim is very good at that.
Jason, thank you so much. And as always, thank you to Anna for making that connection. She's been a wonderful force in connecting you to great American single malts. So Anna Hines has been a big friend of our group. But Jason, thank you so much. These have been absolutely stellar. I mean, the knowledge was fantastic, but the whiskeys were absolutely delicious. And I do wish I had asked you to send me more because they are so good. I'm going to be drinking these, but I'm going to be ordering some from the website. So thank you so much.
Well, absolutely. Well, great talking to you guys. And you have my contact information. So I really do put this out for real. Write me or text me or call me if you really want to discuss something. I would love to stay in touch.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.